With the inclusion of so many horror licenses added to Dead by Daylight recently, there is a question of whether or not some will fit into the game. Obviously, you have more consistent answers with people who hope for Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th, who, while would fit in the game, has his own issues. But at the same time, seeing as we've gotten so many licenses from so many different mediums, as in shows, movies, games, even anime at this point, something that is, to me, unlikely to happen, or if it were to, would cause issues, is if The Last of Us came to Dead by Daylight. As I'm sure a lot of people are aware, The Last of Us is a very, very popular game among people who have played it, and it is even stemmed as far as having its own show. And ultimately, a lot of the issue I have with The Last of Us coming to Dead by Daylight actually stems not from the IP itself, but more so what I think could possibly be an issue. Ultimately, I genuinely think that The Last of Us, if it were to come to the game, would cause more issues than it wouldn't. And that's not even entirely because of behavior. Because my idea is that Sony will make it an issue of licensing and where they are and are not allowed to have the characters. Because as I'm sure you would know, we would probably get survivors like Joel and whoever else. And I think that Sony has a big issue with sharing their characters to consoles that are made by Microsoft. It's been a thing. There's history of this pattern. For example, I can think of two off the top of my head. First of all, we have Kratos being in Mortal Kombat 9. He was only there for the PlayStation version of that game. As far as I know, he might have been in other versions, but he's definitely not in the Xbox version. But another more recent example is the Marvel Avengers game, which I know it's not a very good game, but the game itself released with the initial Marvel characters, the initial Avengers roster, and then they decided to add characters on top of that. One of the characters they decided to add was Spider-Man. Spider-Man became an issue in the sense that he was only accessible to people who played the game on PlayStation. If you played the game on Xbox, there was no possibility of you getting to play Spider-Man. That kind of tangent right there was just sort of to give an example and an idea of Sony's history and why I think it's entirely likely that they will do that again. And let's just go from the player mindset, like somebody who plays the game, somebody who owns the survivors that come with the chapter would have access to that person's perks. And let's say that you have a perk that is so influential that you essentially become pay to win by owning a PlayStation instead of an Xbox, if the licensing issue is a thing. So let's say, for example, you have the Lara Croft chapter, you have Finesse, and Finesse is locked behind a specific console. I genuinely think that would cause more issues than it wouldn't, especially because if you go the other way and you make those perks for those survivors strictly open in the blood web to anybody, then what's the point of redesigning and having this whole survivor instead of just making it an outfit for another character? Because ultimately, you're not getting the survivor to play the survivor, and get their perks. At that point, they're just an outfit because they don't come with perks. I'm going to try and re-explain. If The Last of Us were to come to the game and we had a survivor like Joel, he would have perks dedicated to himself. And those perks will be locked behind specific consoles. Only people who play on PlayStation will be able to access those perks unless they go with the route of making them all accessible to everybody. But at the same time, I have the question of whether or not that's worthwhile on the developing end, because you have to think about the people who design and program and do all of these things to make these characters come to the game. Is it worth spending the time on basically just a glorified outfit? Because realistically, you're only able to get it on said platforms. You would only be able to get money from those said platforms. So only people playing on PlayStation and maybe even PC would be able to access these characters. So you're missing out on, like, I'd say like a third of your like money, just missing out on like Xbox and Microsoft alone. So I think that's where a big issue comes from. It's just on our end as like people who play the game, you have the issue of imbalance, and on the developer's end you have the issue of, is this even worth our time? And it's hard to know whether or not it would be, because ultimately, like, they could dedicate that time that they spend doing whatever they do for this chapter to be doing something completely different, something more monetarily successful for themselves, or just in general for the health of the game. And it's just confusing, because it would be fine if Sony didn't have that track record, if Sony didn't have that reputation of not wanting to share. And I want to touch on the perks aspect again, because I don't think I really got that accurately like conveyed. The issue with perks is that if you have a survivor that is locked to a specific like console, you will have perks in Dead by Daylight that are completely inaccessible to so many people. And that will be a very big issue if one of those perks is just slightly better than the rest. Because if you have a perk like as influential as, like, maybe let's say finesse, you have an issue of people abusing that perk that honestly other people can't. It's genuinely an imbalance. And then on the other end, if you make all these perks accessible to everybody, what do you do to incentivize people to buy these characters? Because at that point they're buying skins, and I don't know if people would want to do that. I don't know how they would incentivize people to buy these characters if their perks are just easily accessible. And at that point, the perks that they bring, might as well just add them and then just completely forget about the chapter entirely, unless they're adamant about adding these survivors. But at the same time, if they add these survivors, a lot of people won't even be able to play them. The balancing of perks and everything like that is just so finicky. It's just you have so many things going on at once and so many things going wrong. I just generally think they should worry about other things first. Pretty depressing that that's the take, you know? I guess you could also extend this to if they wanted to do an Until Dawn Wendigo chapter. It's just really frustrating because you have this very, very popular IP of The Last of Us, and to say they won't make it into a game that is like almost like a Hall of Fame of like horror and horror adjacent, it's kind of sad, because they genuinely, it's genuinely good games, good console. My Xbox runs like poop, but I have a video idea about that later. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if not, okay, that's about it. See you.